Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning online. Really glad to be here with you this morning. Actually, I'm particularly excited because many of you won't know, but seated right back here, Mr. Ken Bolin, who's been a part of this church. Well, he actually is this church. In 1959, he and his wife and 6 other couples planted this church. And so if you haven't met him yet, you need to meet Ken, because whatever blessing you've received because of the ministry here, that's because God's used him. So glad you're able to be with us this morning, Ken. It's a delight also to continue in this series. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, so if you want to go ahead and take your Bibles open there, that'd be great. Really appreciated Alan handling a very significant and complex passage last week, and I particularly appreciated his introduction. That was so helpful about the Padres, and that was great. I did point out to him afterwards that the greatest Padre actually left the team and posted 95 grievances about the team, and then spent the rest of his time in life dodging the team. So I don't know what you make of that, but I think that's actually pretty significant. And it, yeah, okay. Never argue with a seminary professor. And if you missed, that'll just cause you have to listen to that message to understand this morning. What I want to do to help us get into our passage this morning, though, is I want to get us thinking a little bit. And I want you to think about how you would describe Jesus to somebody who had basically no background. They want to know about him. And maybe if you could just capture Jesus in a sentence, what would you tell them for somebody who doesn't really know anything about him? What would you say? What would be there's so much to say, right? What would you make sure to put in? What would you have to leave out? I'll make it a little easier. Let's take this from the vantage point of his humanity. Okay, if we look at his deity, then there's infinite possibilities. Maybe the humanity makes it a little bit easier to say, if I want to introduce you to Jesus as the man that he was, here's what I would say. What would you describe him as? How would you characterize him? I would like to suggest to you that you would have to center on he was a redemptive servant who did everything for the glory of God. He was a redemptive servant who did everything for the glory of God. Whatever else you say, you have to put that in there. Now, obviously, tying that to atonement and the gospel and tying that to deity and all of that, that's part of the picture. But at the very core, he's this redemptive servant who's doing everything for the glory of God. There is no intelligible picture of Jesus that doesn't put that right at the very core. And I think it's important to call that out because as the perfect man, right, he's the standard against which everyone else is measured. He is the exemplar of our aspirations. He is the paradigm for discipleship. And that's true about everything. The Holy Spirit is committing all of the resources of the divine Godhead to forming me into the image of Christ. And that includes a whole lot more than this idea of redemptive servanthood and the glory of God, but it doesn't include less, and it has to keep that at the very center. So many of God's ultimate attributes are not communicable. So many of them are communicable, so holiness and his love and his character and righteousness, all those things will be part of who I become. But as it works its way out in the narrative flow of my life, I have to grapple with the fact that Jesus was a redemptive servant who did everything that he did for the glory of God, and that is my calling as well. There's no other picture. There's no other way. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, does that describe me? If people were saying, let me tell you about Robert, I'll just give you one sentence. Now, they may not use these words. People don't typically use words like this, but would they be able to discern, if you're talking about who I am in my essence, in the real significance of my life, say, yeah, he's a redemptive servant who's doing everything for the glory of God. Would people say that about you? As we come to this morning's passage, this is the conclusion of a whole section in 1 Corinthians where he's been talking about freedom. As followers of Jesus, we have freedom in so many ways, but there's arguments over it. And there's a group in Corinth that's really big into their freedom. We get to do this, we get to do this. You can't tell me what to do. They're kind of early Americans, I think. You're not the boss of me kind of mindset. And he's dealing with that. And what he's going to say is ultimately there's truth to that, but we need to be more broad in our understanding. And for the last couple of chapters, he's looked at this from a number of different angles, and then this morning, he's going to wrap it all up and kind of distill it down into one simple section that says, here's kind of the essence of this. And what he's going to tell us is this. This is maybe surprising for some of us, but there are things that are absolutely wrong, and there are things that are, by their very nature, right? Those things they should not be disputed. But then there's other things where we go, how does that work? And what do I do? And how does it fit in this situation? And someone has this conviction and someone has that conviction. And how do I deal with that? And given those boundaries of what's absolutely right and wrong, here's what he would say. You are completely free to enjoy your life exactly as you want, with no regard to what anyone else thinks is right or wrong. That's his view of freedom. You are completely free to enjoy your life any way you want, with no regard for what anyone else thinks is right or wrong. Right? I'm answerable to Christ, and we're not talking about the things that he's defined, but everything else, I am completely free to live my life any way that I want, with no regard to what anyone else says is right or wrong. Some of you are like, I'm pretty uncomfortable here. I want that discomfort to be there because I think when it comes to freedom, we dodge the issue. That's actually the biblical picture of freedom that we get from this passage. But, there's what you were looking for, but my life is shaped by a commitment to be a redemptive servant who does everything to the glory of God. That's what Paul wants us to get at. They are talking about freedoms that they actually mostly have. Like last week, Alan made it, or was that the week before last? Derek made it last week. Somebody preached last week. I was here. That was you, wasn't it, Derek? Yeah, so Derek preached on that passage. It basically says, whatever you do, you can't enter into worship of demons. I mean, let's be real here. That's crazy. That's not okay. Right? Alan's point was you can't, there are certain things that are incompatible. You can't do them. But outside of that, then the things that you're wanting to do are perfectly legitimate from the vantage point of your actual freedom. But if you're just looking at it from the vantage point of your actual freedom, you're looking at it completely wrong. I am not held captive by your moral standards, but I am concerned with your mortal soul. And now we're the other way around. And so the freedom may be real, but it's not actually the point. There's a bigger question. And the narrative flow of my life is to be like Jesus, who is this redemptive servant who is doing everything for the glory of God. That's the narrative flow of my life too. And so as I engage in the world, there are all kinds of things that are perfectly okay for me to do in principle. But as I try to figure out how does that work its way out in actual concrete experience, it's like, well, there's some challenges. I need to run it through this grid because everything has to fit this calling God has on my life. He's called me into relationship with him, and this is who he is, and this is what he wants me to be, and that's how I have to live. And that may require me to let go of some things and do so joyfully as an act of worship. So that's kind of the background. And as we get into this section, I want to read it for us. We're going to start in verse 23, and I'm going to read it the way I think it should be punctuated. And by that, I don't mean I'm correcting what's there. I'm supplying what's not. In the original text, it doesn't have punctuation. So all of our punctuation is inferred, if you will. And so this section of Corinthians has a number of areas where we kind of infer like quote marks, and those are actually showing up in our English translations where it seems like Paul is quoting them and then responding to them. There's also a parenthetical statement that I think makes sense of this section. Makes it so much easier, as I'm really convinced it's the right way to understand this, and there are a lot of other people that are convinced. I'm not making this up. But if you went and looked at a Greek text, it just doesn't have the punctuation. So I'm going to read it with this punctuation, which means I'm going to leave out a section. I want you to see how it flows so you get it, and then we'll go back and put that section in, because it's not that that section's not important. It's like there's one thought, let's get that thought nailed, and then he's saying, by the way, really critical, in the context of that one thought, we need to keep this in mind. And here's the exceptional piece. Okay? You with me? So let's just read along, and we'll start in verse 23. He says, this is in quotes because this is probably their mantra, right? They're saying this and he's responding to that. All things are lawful, yeah, but not all things are profitable, or not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For why should my liberty, I've skipped down to verse 29. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? You see how that flows? It's like, okay, everything's good. Yeah, that's true, but not everything's profitable. Everything's good. Yeah, but not everything's helpful. And I want you to keep this in mind. Live concern for other people, but it's okay. You do have freedom. And if you're invited by your non-believing friend to have dinner, go, right? You go and enjoy. And if they're serving you meat, that meat may have been offered to idols. In their culture, that would actually have been pretty common because you would take your sacrifice to whatever local temple and you would burn part of it in worship of the god, and you would eat part of it in worship of the God. And then the rest would be sold in the marketplace. So stuff in the marketplace was commonly stuff that had been offered to idols. And so that's a big question. What do we do with that? Is that okay or not? Did cooties grab onto the meat? Or is it just meat? And Paul's saying, no cooties, all meat. Enjoy the meat. If you're there in your neighbor's kitchen, right now I'm modernizing this a little bit. You're there in your neighbor's kitchen, you're chatting away, they're about to cook the meat, you look down and there's a receipt that says, from such and such temple market. Who cares? No cooties attached to it. Eat the meat. Enjoy the porterhouse. It's a great opportunity. Yum, yum. Why would anyone's sense of conscience attach to you? You stand before God. You're free. He made all of this stuff. It's his meat. It's his world. You're eating with gratitude. Enjoy. Okay? That's the flow. And that gets this fundamental idea that says, in areas that are not specifically lined out by God, I do have full freedom. And I am not beholden to your moral standard. And you're not beholden to mine. But I'm very concerned about your mortal soul. And that's what he's going to put back in a very big way. So let's reread this. We'll read the whole section now, and I'll read the parenthetical piece that I left out so we get the whole picture. Verse 23, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then don't eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. I don't mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced? Because of that for which I give thanks. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that that of the many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Okay, he's wrapping this whole section up, and he's wrapping it up by saying, here's how I do it. And it's not like, hey, look at me, aren't I great? I mean, he is the Apostle Paul. In one sense, yeah. Nobody really measures up to him. And nobody has that idea unless they're really foolish, but that's not what he's doing. He's like, I get it. I get what I'm wrestling with the same issues. So here's how I deal with it. If you want to understand how do I deal with my freedoms in light of the larger context, you need to understand, I actually am free. I don't let anyone's sense of right or wrong shape me other than Christ. In fact, earlier he said, I don't even trust my own heart to judge me. I stand before Christ. His judgment is the one that matters, and yours doesn't. But that doesn't mean I get to do whatever I want, even in a world where that's theoretically true, technically true, and the perfect system is true. This isn't the theoretical world. It's not technical. The system's not perfect. I have to work with other people, and there are reasons that I do need to change, willingly, gladly, but they don't have to do with I'm now beholden to your sense of right and wrong, or I'm concerned about how you're going to judge me or what you're going to think of me. That's not it at all. It has to do with what God has called me to and how that will affect you personally in your eternal soul. That matters to me more than the porterhouse steak. And so I make the adjustment. So if that's you, you should do the same thing. Right? Follow me as I'm following Christ. You're at your friend's house and you see the receipt that says it's from the Athena temple, and you go, no big deal, no cooties attached. But then somebody else in the room says, by the way, this was offered. Then you shouldn't eat it. Not because cooties suddenly attached to it, but because you're concerned about their eternal soul. Why are they raising that question? There's something within them that says, if you eat this right now, you will set up a barrier between them and God. Probably the person who's raising this question is actually a non-believer. Because there's two different ways he could have said this has been offered. It could be saying it's offered to an idol or it's offered to a deity. This is saying it's offered to a deity. Christian would probably just say an idol, because we know that idols are basically chunks of wood and stone. They're nothing. There are sometimes demons behind them. Right? That's where the concern comes, and that's what the last section talked about. But the thing itself is just a stick or a stone. It's a nothing, which is why the prophet of old said, how foolish you are. You cut down a tree, you take half of the tree, and you start a fire, and you cook your food, and you eat your food. You take the other half of the tree, you carve it into an idol, and you bow down to it and say, oh, you have made me, oh, save me. And he's mocking them. And it's like, yeah, that's really ridiculous. And the scripture has kind of this dual theme there that says idolatry, formal idolatry, where you're actually worshiping like this thing, is basically nothing. It's just ridiculous. But there is this other reality, and the demonic is behind that, so you got to be careful. So it's been offered at a temple, doesn't matter, no cooties attached, there's nothing going on there. It's just the question of I'm not engaging in the worship myself. I'm not engaging with where the demons could be involved. I'm certainly not going to honor them. But now I'm in the home, and not only are they about to serve me this food, somebody says something, probably an unbeliever, because they said this has been offered to a god, not this has been offered to an idol. Either one could say it, but probably an unbeliever. Why is he raising the question? He knows I'm a believer. He's wrestling with these questions. Just stay away from it. Do not exercise your freedom and cause them harm. Right? That's what he's saying. And it fits with the flow. It's been kind of a back and forth. Let's press on the freedom side. Let's press on the responsibility side, freedom side, responsibility side. And then, oh, by the way, there are certain circumstances where it's completely out of bounds. Now he's wrapping it up, and he's going to bring those two sides together. And in doing that, he actually does something really helpful, because he doesn't just say, look, you need to be careful because of this other person, but as he fleshes out this passage, he leads us to that reality that says, here's what underlies your life. You are supposed to be a redemptive servant who's doing everything for the glory of God. And while it's perfectly okay to have the steak, there's a higher calling. There's a greater need. You need to fulfill that. Don't let anything get in the way of that. if you eat this, your sin won't be you ate something that was in and of itself evil. It's that you chose to make an idol of yourself and do what you wanted instead of living for what God called you for. Freedom is not, in God's economy, is not freedom for me to go after my desires and passions. It's freedom for me to live in light of my design and purpose. And in fact, that first freedom isn't freedom at all. That's what Adam and Eve did in the garden that ruined everything. That didn't turn into freedom, that turned into bondage and destruction. And that's where it always leads. A life wrapped up simply in I'm going to pursue whatever I want is a horrible life to live. A life that is tied in with a greater purpose, and if that greater purpose is God's, is rich and fruitful, and much good will come to it. And he's saying that live with that. And by the way, your purpose is this. You are a redemptive servant living in this world, doing everything you can for the glory of God. And that's what he fleshes out for us. Look here in verse 23, 24 again. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful, right? It may be okay. There's the freedom side. Yes, you can do this, but what's helpful? That's what I'm concerned about. All things are lawful, but not all things build up, right? There's the freedom, but what's going to build up? Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. There you go. You are a servant. You are a servant of your neighbor. And your job is not to build your life only, it's to build his or her life. It's to bring good into his or her life. You're supposed to be helpful. You're supposed to be building up, and you're supposed to seek their good. He ends the whole section with almost exactly the same language, personalized, because he's taking this big truth and saying, look, here's how it works in my life. So it says, don't let anyone seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor in verse 24. And in verse 33, he says, I do not seek my own advantage, but that of the many. You see how that's almost exactly the same. He's just taking that same idea and giving a specific application. And here he makes it clear that it's not just service, but it's redemptive service, right? This is not just let's do good for people, but let's do good for people and let's get the gospel out. He's saying, I do this so that they may be saved. Don't seek your good, don't seek your advantage. He's not saying those things don't matter. He's just saying that's not your focus. You're a servant. How are other people's lives being built by what you're doing? And how is the gospel going forth by what you're doing? Because that will constrain your freedoms. But it will constrain your freedoms not in the way of, oh man, I can't do anything. It's I am focused and following God, and I willingly set that aside because it's in the way, and I want to serve, I want to love, I want to know, I want to be what he's calling me to be. He's saying, do that, be faithful to that. And then in the center, he anchors it with what is theologically and logically and even textually the most significant piece. Because he says here in verse 31, says, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do. So everything's in this very specific context, right? Eating meat offered to idols. Context that the truths that he's speaking apply to all kinds of things, including our lives today. But now he's stepping outside of that context. He's saying, yeah, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, he's absolutizing this context. Whatever you do in any circumstance, at any time, any place, always, there's another absolute thing, do it all to the glory of God. So that's the foundational piece. My life is here in a way so that I bring glory to God. Everything about my life is intended to be lived that way. I need to have that as my aspiration. I need to have that as my focus. I need to have that as what I build my life around, bringing honor and glory to God. As this redemptive servant who's joining him in the world with what he's doing. And then the questions of what I should and shouldn't do as far as freedom go, they simplify so much more. If it's not going to get in the way of me being a redemptive servant, if it's consistent with glorifying God, enjoy it. And it doesn't matter what anyone thinks. Don't be enslaved by what other, you don't need their likes. You don't need them as followers. You don't need them to give you the thumbs up and the smiley face. That's not really a concern. But if what you're going to do is going to get in the way of what God is doing, and it's going to separate you from the partnership that he's called you into, drop it. Don't do it. Step away from that, because there's something more going on. So it comes back to that fundamental question for you and me. All right, our freedom issues aren't the same. I don't think most of us have had occasion to eat meat offered to idols. Some of us have been in contexts where it's a little closer to that than it is here, but just not the normal thing. But there's all kinds of settings and questions and things that go around in our culture to say, what does real freedom look like, and what can I do as a follower of Jesus? And the answer is really clear. If it's not specifically defined by God, you're free. It's his, the earth is his, enjoy it. Do it with gratitude, please. And don't worry that other people don't agree that this is the right thing. You're not beholden to their moral standards. However, remember, that's not what is the substance of your life. That's not the main thing. The main thing is you're called to live in relationship with God. You're called to live in such a way that your life is invested in redemptive servanthood, and everything you're doing is glorifying to him. If it's in the way of that, let it go. That's where I want your attention to be. So that's what he does for them. I want to spend a couple of minutes for us and just say, all right, the text really isn't that complicated to understand. I think we can all grasp that. The question more is in the implications. So let's come back to the question. If somebody is describing my life, how are they going to describe it? Yesterday, I was right here at a memorial service. At all memorial services, some similar things happen. And there's usually multiple people who get up and say something about the person who's passed. And there's a lot of nice things said. And at some point, it's going to boil down to, pretty much for most of them anyway, something like, if you knew my mom, you knew this. Or if you knew my friend, you knew this. And then whatever this is, whatever follows that, is their description, how they capture the essence of who they were. Not the incidental things, but the core, because this is a moment to really focus in on what made them special or distinctive. That's pretty much every memorial service. So it's my memorial service, however far in the future that is. And you're there with a bunch of other people who are there to remember and honor me. And you say, if you knew Robert, you knew X. What's the X? The answer's supposed to be, among whatever else might be there, this has got to be a major theme. If you knew Robert, you knew that he lived his life. He was a committed, redemptive servant who tried to do what he did for the glory of God. Now, it might not have exactly those words, but it ought to have exactly that meaning, or I failed. Someday, some of us, perhaps, will be at your memorial service, and we'll be saying, if you knew so-and-so, you would know this. What do we say? Do we say, or even if we didn't say it, if somebody got up and said, oh, she was a redemptive servant who did everything for the glory of God, and people would be like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I say. That's exactly what I experienced. Would they say that, or words that would equate to that? If not, you failed. Sorry, you failed. That's the picture. So here's the question. Right now, if somebody's characterizing your life, how likely is this to be a major theme? Is that the answer that you would want? And if the answer to that is no, then the next question is, so what happens tomorrow morning? Because we're not at your memorial service. This is a path that God is calling us to, not to do in the strength of our own flesh, but to let the Spirit work out the life of Christ in us. It's a path that is fueled by his power and his grace, but it's a path that I have to intentionally step into. What am I going to do to step into that path tomorrow? Am I one who would be characterized by everyone around me who really knows me to say, yeah, he was really a redemptive servant and really tried to honor God, really tried to glorify God in everything? That's the question. And I would suggest let's get a little more concrete. Let's get a little more concrete. First, the question is that me? Second question is that growing? Because I'm supposed to be growing through my life. And then thirdly, is that maybe time to refocus? I think, I'm pretty sure, by God's grace, if this was my service, people would say those things about me. I don't really have much doubt about that. That would be a common theme, because I think by God's grace, that's how I've tried to live my life. Yes, I try to be a redemptive servant who does everything for the glory of God, and it is a hugely driving factor in my life. But here's the question I have to wrestle with as I come to this passage. It's like, is that something that needs fresh focus? Saw a movie this week. One of the key characters was speaking boldly for God, even though it cost him, physically brutalized, mocked, all of this. And I just looked at that and I thought, wow, God hasn't called me to that. But if he did call me to preach bloodied to the very people who just bloodied me to share the gospel of Christ, would I be the guy to do that? And there have been, it's always a question, right? But there have been times in my life where I would have much more quickly said, oh yeah, sign me up. Not that I'm excited about that, but I'm that committed and I'm that engaged. And I have to be honest, it's like, give me a second. That's my answer now. I'll still get to where I need to be. I believe that, but give me a second. Is there some other path? Is there some other, and it's not like I want to choose the suffering, but there is something that is in my spirit that says, aha, Robert, your life's in a different place, and intensity and focus, all those things shift around a little bit, but the ultimate doesn't. So intensity may change, but intentionality is not supposed to. Do I need to recapture some intentionality in being a redemptive servant and doing everything for the glory of God? Maybe you find yourself there. Or here's another way to look at this very concretely. If I'm a redemptive servant doing what I do for the glory of God, it has to work its way out in practical ways. How about my calendar? If I look at my calendar and what I'm investing my time in, does it look like that? How about my wallet? If you check my, last service I said checkbook and they understood me. This service will say, if I checked your Apple Pay account, what would it reflect? How about my prayer list? What is it that I'm praying for? Is my prayer list all consumptive? There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I am fully dependent on God. And if I have sickness, if I have pain, if I have need, I'm absolutely supposed to bring those things to him. But is that all I do? Is that all I ask? Is that where my center of gravity is? Because that oughtn't to be the case. How about my dreams? The things that I go, man, this would be awesome. Well, it could be all kinds of stuff, but does it at least match with a life lived to the glory of God? Can I see sacrifice in my life? Not necessarily like the character in the movie that I watched who's preaching while bloody. That might be called upon. Sacrifice for most of us is much more innocuous than that, but it's still real. I'm saying no to this that I want in order to do this because it's better. Can I see that? Am I being a redemptive servant doing what I'm doing for the glory of God? That's what he's calling us to in this passage. I think it's helpful also to break it down by kind of focal point. These are all intertwined. But let's take them one at a time. He starts by saying, don't just seek your own advantage. Don't just, do what's helpful. Do what builds up others. So here's a really good question. Whose life am I building? Right? I am building my life, and that's good and right. And all of this has to be kept under proper theological constraint. And this isn't just a nod to orthodoxy. It's actually how we ought to live. Unless the Lord builds the house, I'm laboring in vain. So I'm not talking about, here's what I'm doing in my own strength and my own plan. It's like, no. With a full understanding of a partnership with the Spirit of God and the way he works and the grace of God and his sovereignty and all of those things, I still have a very significant intentional engagement. What kind of life am I building? For me, and who else's life am I building? When I look at building for me, one of the things as I was looking at even refocusing, this image has been in my mind, right? He says, I am seeking these things. I'm leaning into this, right? I'm seeking to bring advantage to others. I'm seeking to get the gospel out. I think it's easy in a life where I've been faithful for a long time to kind of get to a place where I'm back on my heels. Well, of course, if somebody comes, if something presents, I'm going to be all over that. Right? And if somebody happens to grab me and throw me down and say, I don't know Jesus, please lead me to salvation, I'll do that. But am I leaning, I'm supposed to be on the balls of my feet going, where's my opportunity, Lord? How am I looking to be invested and engaged? In whose life am I building? Whose life? You already have lives that you're responsible for, right? You have children. You're responsible for partnering with the Spirit to build their lives. What are you building? Don't just listen to the culture around us that says your job is to provide a safe place for them to fully explore and develop according to whatever makes the most sense and whatever is most beautiful and desirous for them. That is an important piece. But it leaves out the reality that my precious little children are just as messed up at the heart as I am. And they don't need to simply be freed to find for themselves. They, just like I do, need to understand God defines things. They need to be nurtured in the admonition of the Lord. They've got to respond. I cannot behavior modify somebody into integrity and faithful Christ-likeness. That's crazy. But it's also crazy to just say, well, whatever they want, we're going to go after that. I'm responsible to build a life. How am I building? Are you married? How are you building your spouse's life? As a husband, a central part of my life is to do what I can and to live as I can so that my wife thrives. That's not just some theological distillation of biblical principles. That's the direct implication of Ephesians 5. I am failing as a husband if it is not easier for my wife to follow Jesus because she's married to me. What am I doing? How am I building? Not just my life, but her life. I have friends. And I have coworkers. I have a church family. This is our family. How am I building your life? What does your ministry in this family look like? We need you, and you need to be building us. Do you have a ministry? If not, maybe that's the thing you change tomorrow morning and say, I need to start figuring that out. Your ministry could have like a job description attached to it. I teach 4-year-olds. God bless you. Thank you. Right? That's wonderful. We need people to teach 4-year-olds or junior hires, right? It may be I've got some tech skills. Can you train me to work up in the sound booth? Yeah, wow, we could sure use that. I mean, there's plenty of needs that fit you. But not every ministry even has a job description. It has a focus, an intentionality, a significance about it, and a consistency that says, I will be consistently engaged. I will be significantly engaged. And I will be frequently engaged in building the lives of my brothers and sisters here as part of my family. And whether I have a job description that connects to some specific public ministry, or whether it's, I'm going to start inviting people to my home, I'm going to look for opportunities to pray, I'm going to look for needs to meet, but I'm engaged. I'm engaged a lot, and I'm engaged with intention. What lives are you building? What lives am I building? The part that Paul ends with is about the gospel. Like, I'm not seeking my advantage, but the advantage of the many, so they may be saved. How are you spreading the gospel? What does that look like? And am I really engaged fully? Right? It's good to engage at any level, but I need to engage fully, because here's the reality. Nobody has ever, in all of the history of humanity, come to a saving relationship with God because I said to them, I'm praying for you. I need to do that. I need to say that. That's all part of what it means to point people to Jesus. But at some point, pointing people to Jesus is telling them about him. And God talk, while it's important, is only part of the package. And by the way, moral lectures, which we like to give, are not even always helpful. In fact, I would suggest more often than not, they're not helpful. We like to post on our social media or have these conversations, and we look at that as, here's my missional act, and I'm going off on whatever. And I may be telling truth, and don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place to speak truth clearly. But don't confuse that with what Paul's saying. He says, I'm adjusting everything for their advantage so that they would be saved. Now, he's an apostle. He's a missionary. His entire life, his entire daytimer is focused there. Mine is not. Even as a pastor, mine is not. And yours is certainly not if you're an engineer or a teacher or a stay-at-home parent or a coach or whatever your role is. There are adjustments made for that, but at the end of the day, we're all called to the same mission. He says, follow me as I follow Christ. I'm seeking to build other people's lives, and I'm seeking to get the gospel out so that they can know him too. That's an area that maybe some of us need to look at and say, okay, Lord, what's next for me? Of course, the anchor point is the glory of God. And it's always appropriate for me to say, how am I celebrating God? How am I magnifying God from my own heart and in the eyes of those around me? These are intended to be very practical, not just a theoretical thing. Paul's saying, yes, please enjoy the steak. If you give you a doggy bag, bring me some too. I love steak, bring me some. But don't let steak get in the way of what really matters. What really matters is that you would be following Jesus and letting his Spirit work the life of Christ out in you. And Christ, who is this redemptive servant doing everything to the glory of God, has called you into that same life. Build other people's lives. Do what blesses them. Live to bless. Share Christ. Get explicit to the point that people can understand, and do everything else that builds into that. And whatever you do, keep building the name of Christ. Keep honoring him. Keep him at the center where he's the delight of your heart and he's the one that you're pointing to. That's what Paul is calling them to, and that's what he calls us to too, I think, ultimately. I was trying to think of maybe one person's life I could tell you about that would capture some of the dynamics, and I thought of a friend of mine in Cambodia. His name is Sokun. Met him in 2012. When I met him, he was just a teacher. I don't mean just as in denigrating, but that was like his only focus. I'm a teacher. I teach people, and these kids in these villages don't have good teachers, so I'm getting around and I'm teaching. And when I met him, there were 8 villages he was teaching in. Well, he's a believer, and he has a voice in these kids' lives, and they start coming to faith, and so their parents start showing up and asking questions. They're grateful for what he's doing, and they start asking questions, and they start coming to faith, and pretty soon Sakun has 8 villages with these home Bible studies that are going on, and he's like, what am I doing? I'm just trying to build other people's lives, get the gospel out, and whatever I'm doing, I'm honoring God in it the best I can. I'll find some other people to help me, and he did. That's actually how we got connected, because of a partner we had who said, hey, so God's doing some stuff here, and they need some help. And if you'd help put in some wells here, we put in 8 wells, one in each of those villages. If you put in some wells here, that creates an opportunity for further conversation about what this is about and why, and who knows how God might use it. And so, sure enough, we did, they did, and then the next thing you know, there's churches there, and Sakun is working with these other pastors, and the next thing you know, he's actually like a regional leader in the whole church and mentoring other pastors. And I saw him again in 2019. We took a team to his area to do some more work. And then in 2023, I saw him in another area where we were and got to reconnect, and that was great. In 2024, the last time we were there, it's like, whoa, Sakun was not as present, and he was really busy, but he made a point of coming, made a point of connecting with me, because we have a real, actual friendship. And his life has taken another turn. He said, I had a dream, not like Martin Luther King, where it was like an aspirational dream. That's a beautiful thing, but this is no, like I had an actual dream, and I didn't know what to do with it, but I thought maybe God was in it. And basically the upshot is I woke up, and the events of the next few days lined up. It's like, I think that dream was to tell me to do this. So I did this, and now I am the chief of staff for the governor of the province. And it's a place where I have influence and the ability to help all kinds. It's like, whoa. What's he doing? Well, it's his context, right? But he's just saying, I will live my life, build into other people, seek to get the gospel out, honor God, and see where that takes me. Now, that's a pretty dramatic story in a very different context. That's part of why I can tell it, because there's stuff to connect with, but it doesn't add any of the complication factors. My life and your life probably don't look exactly like that, but the dynamics are exactly the same. Am I living my life for the glory of God and looking to bless other people, build other lives, and get the gospel out? In that context, if you want to have the meal and it doesn't cause a problem, enjoy. But if it gets in the way of that, don't let anything get in the way of that. How's that going? How's that going? I'm going to ask the ushers to come. I'm going to pray for us. And we're going to have the prayer team come as well. And I just want to give you a chance as you respond to the Lord. The offering is a response, of course, an act of worship. But if God's working in your heart, maybe related to the sermon, it's like, I feel like I need some refocus. Can you pray for me? Or maybe you're actually doing well on that front. I'm focused, but I can see something that's coming that's gonna be tough. Had an extended conversation yesterday at the memorial service with a guy whose life has just been ground up. It's just run through the ringer. And his life right now is, I need to stay faithful. And I'm trying. And that's the prayer need he has. You may be going into a grinder and you need prayer. You need support from your brother or sister. There may be something completely different. You may have walked into this room with a different need or concern. The team is up here to pray with you. For whatever reason, I encourage you as we sing, let them pray. Let's do this life together. Let them do something with God that'll build your life. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your grace and your mercy. And I do pray for more of it. Help us to just walk in step with you, Lord. Thank you that everything is good and from you. So much that you've done in this world that's so beautiful. Thank you for the freedom that we have. But Lord, may we not live for that. May we live for the sake of your name, by the power of your Spirit. May we be those who bless others and who share Christ and whose lives are defined by that. Lord, you know where each of us is. Would you take us the next step? Pray that you'd bless this offering. You would use this, in fact, for those very purposes. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand as we sing, please?